what the prequel series would have looked like if George Lucas had his way in the 90s.
I think George likes people. I think George is a warm-hearted person.
I have rewritten, I spent the whole weekend rewriting the scene between you and Palpatine, where you turn.
Yeah.
But he's a little impatient with the process of acting, of finding something, you know? And he thinks it's there. It's right there. I wrote it down, you know. Just do that. You know, and sometimes you can't just do that and make it work.
So George Lucas had written the prequel trilogy. He was like, okay, sweet. Here it is. Here's the story. Here's the direction we want to go. We want to shoot it digitally. These are the things I want to do. Okay, let me talk to some of my director buddies and see what they say about this. George Lucas historically hated directing. Like, he had tons of panic attacks and stress around the production of A New Hope.
He was diagnosed with hypertension and exhaustion and was warned to reduce his stress level.
At that point, I really felt that I'd gotten myself into a real mess and I didn't know whether I was going to get it out.
He historically doesn't do the greatest job when it comes to directing people towards acting and getting the best performances out of them, I'll say. So when he went into the prequel trilogy, he was like, yeah, if at all possible, I would like to not do this. So he reached out to some of his buddies. He reached out to Steven Spielberg, he reached out to Robert Zemeckis, and he reached out to Ron Howard. But what would a Star Wars movie look like if we look at something like, let's start with Steven Spielberg. He was like the creator of the classic 80s movie and has just continued to create things in film. He's got incredible range when it comes to a director. Schindler's List, okay. Jaws, The Fabelmans in 2022, Jurassic Park, E.T., Ready Player One. If we have Star Wars, we have the origins of Darth Vader as like the backdrop, the main bits of story that we know need to happen.
Yeah.
If we look at that and then we say, hey, what if Steven Spielberg took this material? What would he do with it?
I really feel like he would have focused even more on Anakin.
Yeah.
And really just followed him through a lot more of this. Because there seems to be a lot of we follow Obi Wan a lot in the prequels, but I think we would have just stuck with Anakin a lot more.
Also would have been more like personal towards that story. Like, I think it would have made more sense. I think he would have got more into like the emotions and like the history side of things of how can you as a small child and go through these various experiences within Star Wars. What does it look like for you to come over here and eventually become one of the greatest killing machines in the galaxy? I think it would have made a lot more sense under Steven Spielberg.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there would have been a lot more cohesiveness, especially with the emotions, the acting, the moods, just all of it. I think a lot of it would have been a lot more down to earth in a way that would make it a lot more relatable.
I feel like that's something that Steven Spielberg makes in his movies like very approachable, is the idea of like the characters and how they get from one place to the next in a believable way.
Oh yeah, I know what we should do. When we get to the next skeleton, that's a good idea. That's a great idea. Wait a second, that's terrific. So great, my earphone broke in half. That's how good the idea was.
If we look at like Indiana Jones, which is one of his big ones, if we look at like Jurassic Park and like these bigger movies that he's taken a part in, like so influential on the movie industry in general. But ultimately it comes down to how do these things impact the person or the people that are in the movie.
Do you think it would be more of the event that would lead the story, or is it more of the characters?
I think it would be the characters, honestly. I think we'd focus more on like the characters and their reactions. George Lucas's original plan was to have a very similar thing like he did with the original trilogy, where he maybe directed the first one and then people picked up the other ones, or just have like different directors for each of them. But I would love to have seen a Steven Spielberg Attack of the Clones. I think that would have been fantastic to see.
But like, what about it? Like, just that we would get more understanding?
It would be super fascinating. Like, I think it would have been a very unique look at Star Wars. There are so many threads in Attack of the Clones. There is the Anakin Padme thread, which is really weird. It's super, like, uncomfortable. There's the Obi-Wan discovering a secret in the library that Palpatine wanted him to find, but made it super difficult. And if it wasn't Obi-Wan that found it, it never would have happened. And then he didn't ask any more questions. And then the clones happened, and Cyvidius and Count Dooku, and all of that's happening. The war in general.
The Geonosians and the rise of this mechanical army.
Yeah, so many different thread lines and so many different things that happen that don't necessarily make sense or have to happen like a certain way. I think giving that to Steven Spielberg and saying, hey, let's make a film out of this, he would have made a lot more changes, and I think would have brought it into more grounded reality.
I would agree.